This program is made possible by financial support from viewers like you.
We're tuning in tonight, where the truth and the rumors collide in the light. From prophecy to mystery, we got it going on. Welcome to the sound of Babylon. Babbling on in
Welcome back, my fellow believers and non-believers alike, to Babbling on in Babylon. My name is Will, and I am an aspirant follower of Yeshua HaMashiach. You might know him as Jesus Christ. Alright folks, gather round because we're doing a deep dive tonight. And I warn you right up front, once you go down this road with me, you're never going to look at that big green lady in New York Harbor the same way again. Everybody thinks they know the Statue of Liberty. Gift from France, symbol of freedom. Give me your tired, your poor. That's the story they taught you in 3rd grade, and that's the story most people carry to their grave without ever questioning. But folks, the deeper you dig into this statue, her origins, her symbolism, who actually built her and why, the stranger it gets. And I mean stranger than you'd expect from something standing in the middle of New York Harbor in broad daylight for 140 years. So let's just go there together. Let's explore every trail. And I want you to sit with each one before you decide what you believe. Because, and stay with me on this, some of what sounds like the wildest theory in this pile is actually the most documented. And some of what sounds like sober historical fact turns out to be softer than you think. That's the trap here. That's what makes this one worth doing right. Trail 1. The statue that was never supposed to be white. Now, there's a story that's been circulating for decades, through libraries, through churches, through word of mouth, long before it ever hit the internet, that the original Lady Liberty wasn't a European woman at all, that Bartholdi's first design show a black woman, modeled after freed slaves, holding broken shackles up in her hand for the whole world to see. And the story goes that American backers, the ones funding the pedestal, the ones who'd have to look at her every day, got uncomfortable with a monument that centered black emancipation quite so plainly. So the design got softened. The shackles moved, the face changed, and what we got instead was a safer, wider, more palatable goddess. Now here's the thing that keeps this one alive, folks. There's an actual bronze model sitting right now in the Museum of the City of New York, dated around 1870, showing Liberty with what looks like a broken shackle in her hand and chains coming out from under her robe. That's not somebody's imagination. That's a physical object that you can go look at. Trail 2. She's not even American. She's Egyptian. Before Bartholdi ever pitched this statue to America, he pitched almost the exact same design to Egypt. A colossal robed woman holding a torch, meant to stand at the mouth of the Suez Canal as a lighthouse. He called her Egypt, carrying the light to Asia. Egypt turned him down on cost. And not long after, this same design, same pose, same torch, same face type, modeled on Egyptian women he'd sketched years earlier, got repackaged and shipped off to New York Harbor as an American icon. So ask yourself, folks, Is the most famous symbol of American liberty actually a rejected Egyptian lighthouse wearing a new coat of paint? Trail 3. The Freemasons built her, financed her, and buried her. Here's where it gets a little heavier, folks. Bartholdi, I don't know, whatever that name is I've been butchering, a Freemason. Laboulaye, the man who proposed the whole ideal, a Freemason. Gustave Eiffel, who engineered her steel skeleton, a Freemason. And when it came time to lay the cornerstone of her pedestal in 1884, it wasn't done by government officials. It was done in a full, formal Masonic ceremony by the Grand Lodge of New York, complete with a buried time capsule containing the Constitution, medals of Freemason presidents, and Masonic ritual objects. Corn, wine, and oil. The whole right. There's a Masonic plaque bolted into her pedestal to this day. And in certain corners of Masonic literature from that era, she isn't described simply as liberty. She's described, and I want you to sit with this one, folks, in the same breath as ancient goddesses. Isis, Astarte, the old Babylonian mother goddess figures that show up over and over in occult tradition, going all the way back, some say, to Nimrod and Semiramis, a colossal, torch-bearing goddess conceived and consecrated entirely by Freemasons, standing at the gateway to America. And I want you to take note, that's not a rumor cooked up on the internet last week. That's sitting in Masonic archives. Trail 4. The crown, the chains, and the devil of Liege. Okay, folks, there's the one I know a lot of you have already seen. We just covered it in the last podcast episode. The side-by-side. A statue in Belgium, in a Catholic cathedral no less, carved decades before Lady Liberty, of a chained, fallen figure the world knows as the Lucifer of Liege, or Liege. Liege, I think it's Liege. Pardon my French again. Same seven-pointed crown resting nearby. A broken scepter at his feet. Chains at his ankle. An apple representing the fall of man. And when you set his face next to hers, the jawline, the setting of the eyes, a lot of people looking at those two images side by side see the same face twice. Coincidence? Maybe. But Lucifer's very name translates from Latin as light bringer. And what is Lady Liberty holding above her head for the entire world to see, lighting the way forever? Trail 5. Who is she really? Even her own sculptor's story about her face has 3 or 4 competing versions, depending on who you ask. His mother, a French seamstress, even, in some tellings, a man. Nobody quite agrees. The most reproduced woman in American iconography, and we can't even settle who she's the face of. So there you have it, folks. Swapped race, rejected Egyptian goddess, Masonic occult dedication, a hidden devil, a stolen face. Lay all 5 of those side by side and it stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like some kind of pattern. Or does it? Because here's the thing about patterns, folks. The human mind is built to find them, even where they don't exist. And when you've spent as much time as I have telling you to think critically, to test the spirits, to hold every claim up to the light before you accept it, I owe you the same discipline on my own stories. So let's go back through every single one of those 5 trails. Slow this time. And hold each one up to what's actually documented. Not to what they say, not what sounds compelling at 2 in the morning, what's actually on paper, in the archives, in the sculptor's own hand. And folks, I promise you, what's real here is, in some ways, even more interesting than all those myths. Grab you some refreshments, maybe a snack or two. Stick around.
We're tuning in tonight, where the truth and the rumors collide in the light. From prophecy to mystery, we got it going on. Welcome to the sound of Babylon. Babbling on in Babylon, the stories keep rolling, the beat goes on. From shadows deep to the break of dawn, we keep babbling on. Put up the page, ancient words on the mic, conspiracies keep rolling, the beat goes on. From shadows deep to the break of dawn, we keep babbling on. Flip the page, ancient words on the mic, conspiracies, prophecies ride through the night. From heart to the heavens, the signs in the sky, asking the questions they don't want you to try. Truth ain't clean, it's a puzzle and a fight, but we crack it wide open when the time is right. Whispers in the dark, voices in the dawn. Welcome to the chaos, Babylon. Babbling on in Babylon, the stories keep rolling, the beat goes on. From shadows deep to the break of dawn, we keep babbling on.
Welcome back. Let's get into a story that'll surprise you right out of the gate. The story you already know. The official story has its own embellishments baked in. The popular version says La Boule proposed the statue at a dinner party in 1865, right after Lincoln's assassination, as a grand gesture of French-American brotherhood. The National Park Service commissioned a 2-year investigation into this statue's origins back in 1998, and their own finding was that the 1865 dinner party is a legend, traceable to a single fundraising pamphlet Bartholdi wrote in 1885, after Le Boule had already died and couldn't correct the record. Every piece of actual evidence points to the real conception happening around 1870 or 1871. 5 years later than the story we all grew up with. So even the boring official version has a little varnish on it, worth remembering before we get too confident about anything concerning Lady Liberty. The abolition connection is real, but not the swap story. Now, here's the big one. La Boule genuinely was a committed French abolitionist. He co-founded the French Anti-Slavery Society, and by his own writing, he saw the end of American slavery as the fulfillment of the liberty promised in the Declaration of Independence. That part's solid. And that early bronze maquette from around 1870, sitting in the museum in the city of New York with what looks like a broken shackle and chain, that's real too. You can go see it. But here's where the popular version runs past the evidence. There is no documentation anywhere, not in Bartholdi's letters, not in the fundraising records, not in the American Committee's papers, showing that a design was rejected specifically because it depicted a black woman, or that white American backers demanded the change on racial grounds. What the NPS investigation actually found is that Bartholdi moved the broken chain from her hand to her feet, hidden beneath her robe, at Loubelet's own request, to broaden the symbolism from one specific American struggle into a universal statement about liberty for all mankind. So the chains are real. The abolitionist heart behind the statue is real. But the "they swapped her out because she was black" version isn't supported by the paper trail. What is supported is something quieter and, honestly, almost as striking. The emancipation symbolism was there from the start, and it got softened, then buried under a completely different story. Because here's the twist nobody tells you. The whole "welcome the immigrants" meaning we all associate with this statue today. The NPS investigation found that's a 20th century invention. In her first 50 years, this statue was talked about constantly in connection with the Civil War and abolition. And in the early 1900s, white nativist and supremacist groups actually seized on her image to argue against immigration, the exact opposite of what she stands for today. The huddled masses meaning didn't take over as the dominant story until the 1930s and 1950s. So if you want a genuinely hidden truth about this statue, that's it. Not a swapped statue, a swapped meaning. Decades later, that most of us have never even questioned. Now let's talk about that Egyptian connection. Also real and well documented. This one holds up almost exactly as the theory states it, and it's not even controversial among historians. It's just not widely known. Bartholdi did pitch a colossal lighthouse statue for the Suez Canal in the late 1860s, titled "Egypt Carrying the Light to Asia," using his own drawings of Egyptian women as reference. Egypt's ruler passed on the cost. The design elements clearly carried forward into liberty. This is documented in Bartholdi's own sketches and acknowledged by park historians. So, genuinely true. Genuinely underappreciated. No debunking required here. What about those Freemasons? All true. None of it secret. Every piece of Trail 3 checks out on the record, and none of it needed to be hidden. It was public and celebrated at the time. Bartholdi, Laboulaye, and Eiffel were Freemasons. The pedestal's cornerstone genuinely was laid in a full Masonic ceremony on August 5, 1884, by the Grand Lodge of New York, with the time capsule and traditional rites. There's a bronze Masonic plaque on the pedestal to this very day. None of that was ever a secret. It was front-page news in 1884, and Masonic lodges still commemorate it. Laying civic cornerstones with Masonic ceremony was standard practice for major American monuments in that era. Going all the way back to George Washington laying the U.S. Capitol's cornerstone himself in 1793. Yeah, old George, he was a Mason. But where this conspiracy gets shakier is the ISIS Astarte Nimrod Semiramis language. That specific framing traces back to fringe occult conspiracy writers reinterpreting old Masonic rhetoric, not to anything Bartholdi, Laboulet, or the Grand Lodge said about their own intentions at the time. So, real fraternal involvement in a very public, very typical 19th century civic ritual, dressed up generations later in language its own builders never used. But let's talk a little bit about that crown on Lady Liberty's head. Bartholdi's own 1878 patent application describes the head as surmounted by a diadem from which rays proceed. Every serious historical source ties those 7 rays to the 7 continents and 7 seas. A classical Helios and Apollo-style sunburst crown representing liberty's reach across the globe. I could not find any documented source from Bartholdi's era or since tying the number to the 7 deadly sins, as it's been reported in many conspiracy theories online. It's just not there. That detail appears to be a modern overlay with no real historical footing. But what about the Lucifer of Liege connection? Well, the Lucifer of Liege, however you pronounce it, is a real statue. It's in a real cathedral. But its actual documented purpose runs almost opposite to the theory. It was commissioned by the Bishop of Liege explicitly as the triumph of religion over the genius of evil. A Catholic devotional piece meant to show Lucifer chained, weeping, and defeated. It's literally installed as a warning against evil, not a tribute to it. And I could find no historical documentation, no letters, no biography, no contemporaneous review connecting Bartholdi to this statue in any way, not even the 6 degrees of separation. Now, the side-by-side comparisons trace back to recent internet posts, not to any 19th century source. Most of the posts came from within the last 10 years or so. Some can be traced back to the early 2000s, that retro era when conspiracy theories seemed to rule the interwebs. But again, no valid historical sources could be found to cite. The chains, the discarded crown, the apple, all real details on the Belgian statue. But they're common romantic sculpture conventions of that era, not a fingerprint linking 2 unrelated works by 2 completely unrelated sculptors in 2 different countries. Sorry, folks. Okay, then. What about the face? Whose face is it, then? Well, historians point to a specific sourced account. In 1876, a French senator remarked to Bartholdi that his mother, Augusta Charlotte Bartholdi, resembled the statue, and Bartholdi confirmed she was in fact his model. That's about as close to a paper trail as you get for this one. The other names you'll hear floated are largely undocumented internet-era additions. So where does that leave us, folks? Out of 5 threads, you had one that turned out to be flatly true and hiding in plain sight the whole time. The Freemasons. One that turned out to be true and genuinely underappreciated. The Egyptian origin. One that turned out to be half true in the most interesting way possible. Not a swapped statue, but a swapped meaning. Decades after the fact, that most of us never thought to question. And 2, the occult goddess worship framing and the Lucifer connection. That turned out to be later interpretations layered on to real objects, without a shred of documentation tying them to what Bartholdi and Laboulaye actually said and did. And that, folks, right there is the whole lesson, isn't it? Scripture tells us to test everything and hold fast to what is good, not to swallow every claim whole, and not to reject every strange-sounding claim out of hand either. The truth here wasn't in the comfortable version taught in 3rd grade, and it wasn't in the wildest version floating around online. It was somewhere in between, sitting quietly in an archive, waiting for somebody to actually go look. What's the discipline? The whole game. Question what you're told, including by me. Stick around. This next segment's gonna have you doing a double take on those snacks. Go ahead, refresh your refreshments, and keep your snacks at a distance, because we're gonna be diving into those Frankenfoods next.
Well, you know what time it is. Every old country gathering had that moment. The basket made its way down the aisle. It's how the lights stayed on and the doors stayed open. These days, it looks a little different. If this video brought you any value, follow over on Rumble. Share it with someone who might need it. If you want to support directly, there's PayPal for a one-time gift, Ko-Fi for a few extras, and Patreon for the deeper content that doesn't always fit neatly here. And if all you can do is share it, that matters more than you think. Thank you. Truly. Alright, back to the show.
Alright, folks. We did this with the Statue of Liberty. So, let's do it again. Lean all the way into it. Walk the whole dark hallway together. And then turn the lights on at the end and see what's actually standing there. We're going to do it with something a whole lot closer to home than the statue in a harbor. We're doing it with what's on your fork. Because, folks, something has happened to the American food supply. And I don't think it happened by accident. So hop on your proverbial bike and let's ride through it. You've seen the videos by now. Somebody runs hot water over a scoop of what's supposed to be ice cream. And it just sits there. Doesn't melt, doesn't budge. One fellow online asked if it was petrified. Another one asked if it came from outer space. And here's the thing, folks. It's not just one video. It's dozens of them. Going back years. Different brands. Same results. Something that's supposed to melt in a warm car in 10 minutes is sitting under a running hot tap for a full minute, holding its shape like a science experiment. And when people go check the ingredients, they're not finding cream and sugar and vanilla. They're finding a chemistry set. Stabilizers, gums, mono and diglycerides, maltodextrin, and a lot of what's in your freezer aisle right now doesn't even legally get to call itself ice cream anymore. It says frozen dairy dessert right there on the box in small print, hoping you won't notice the demotion. Go ahead, you get some ice cream in your fridge? Go check it. Make sure it's got ice cream in that box. And then we're going to turn to chocolate again. And this one's not a rumor, folks, like we discussed before. This one's happening right now, out in the open, and I'm not happy about it. Major chocolate companies, the ones behind your Oreos, your Ritz crackers, your Table Round, are backing biotech startups that grow cocoa butter in bioreactors instead of on trees. They take a single cocoa bean, extract the cells, and multiply them in a vat with sugar water and vitamins until they got enough biomass, that sounds appetizing, to press out cocoa butter that never grew in soil, never saw the sun, never touched a farmer's hand. And they're not hiding it. They're proud of it, bragging in press releases about how one bean can now produce a metric ton of the stuff. Meanwhile, over in West Africa, they're used to growing something like 70% of the world's real cocoa, and millions of small farming families depend on that crop for their entire livelihood. You connect those two facts and ask yourself, what happens to those families when the world's biggest chocolate companies don't need the beans anymore? Or better yet, what happens to all of us 10 years from now when we find out we've been consuming chocolate that was actually a biomass? What's it going to do with our guts, our DNA? Now here's one that ought to make you angry, folks. You've been trained for 20 years to look for the letters GMO on a label. Well, guess what? The federal government passed a law that makes sure you'll never see those letters on a label again. That way you can feel nice and safe. It's called the National Bioengineered Food Disclosure Standard. That's a mouthful of big 50-cent words, isn't it? And instead of the term everybody actually recognizes, they picked a brand new phrase, bioengineered, that most shoppers have never heard and wouldn't think twice about. And it gets worse. A lot of companies don't even have to put words on the package at all. They're allowed to slap a tiny QR code on there instead, knowing full well that almost nobody in the checkout line is going to whip out their phone and scan a cracker box. Consumer advocacy groups sued over exactly this, arguing the whole system was built to look transparent while making sure as few as people as possible actually find out what's in their food. Folks, that's not an accident. That's a design choice. And here's the part that should really turn your stomach. You would assume, wouldn't you? Well, we know what happens when you assume. That before some brand new chemical gets added to millions of Americans' food, somebody at the FDA sits down, runs the test, and signs off on it. You know, a government keeping us safe with the Food and Drug Administration. Folks, that is not what happens. Not most of the time. I was shocked to find out that there's a loophole called GRAS. GRAS. Generally recognized as safe. And under this loophole, a company can hire its own scientists, run its own studies, decide for itself that its new ingredient is safe, and start putting it in your food without ever telling the FDA that it exists. Talk about having the fox guard the hen house. Ridiculous. There's no independent review, no public comment, no outside eyes on it at all. Unless the company voluntarily decides to ask. They're grading their own homework, folks, and they've been doing it for over 50 years. And if you're wondering whether any of this actually matters, just look across the ocean. Titanium dioxide, used to make foods look whiter and brighter, banned in the European Union in 2022 over DNA damage concerns. Guess what, folks? Still perfectly legal here in the United States. Certain dough conditioners and preservatives, banned in Europe decades ago over links to cancer and organ damage, still sitting safe and sound on American shelves right now for you as an American consumer to stuff right down your neck hole. Same country, same corporations even, selling a different, cleaner recipe to European customers than the one they sell to you. If it's safe enough for your kitchen table, why isn't it safe enough for theirs? And if it's not safe enough for theirs, then why is it safe enough for yours? So there you have it, folks. Chemistry set ice cream. Lab-grown chocolate quietly replacing African farmers. A label system built to hide what it claims to disclose. A safety net with a hole cut right through the middle of it. And a double standard sitting in plain sight on grocery shelves on 2 different continents. Lay that all side by side, and it stops looking like coincidence, doesn't it? Or does it? Because, folks, same rule applies here as it did with Lady Liberty. I owe you the same discipline as I ask of you. Let's take every one of those 5 trails and hold it up against what's actually documented, actually on the record, and actually provable as fact. Not what feels true, but what is true. And I'll tell you right now, some of what we just walked through is going to fall apart completely. And some of it is going to turn out to be even more real and even more well documented than the version I just gave you. That's the deal. So make sure those refreshments are refreshed. And if you're not already taking a second glance at your snacks, maybe you might just want to shove them to the side for this next part. Alrighty, folks, stick around. I'll see you on the flip side.
Are you tired of carrying the weight of the world? Do you suffer from chronic hopelessness, persistent guilt, or an unshakable sense that something is missing?
Introducing the Bible, the time-tested, soul-approved solution to the human condition. Not just another book, but a revolutionary life treatment backed by thousands of years of divine research. The Bible works naturally with your heart and mind to reveal your purpose, provide peace, and even reconnect you with your Creator. Side effects may include sudden outbursts of joy, unexplainable hope in dark circumstances, increased compassion and patience, talking to God like He's actually listening. He is. Freedom from fear, guilt, and shame. Radical forgiveness of others and yourself. Occasional moments of, wow, I really needed to hear that. A burning desire to love your neighbor, even if they play the drums at midnight. Not recommended for people who enjoy holding grudges, hate being challenged, or insist on being their own God. Results may vary, but eternal life is guaranteed with regular use. Consult your Creator before starting a Bible regimen. Side effects increase with prayer. The Bible. Ask your soul if it's right for you.
All right, welcome back, folks. Thanks for sticking around. I know your time is valuable. It's one of the 2 things we can't get back, and I sure do appreciate you spending a little bit here with this old man babbling on in Babylon. And before we get started on checking out these 5 trails that we've been on in this second half of the podcast episode with the Frankenfoods, I wanted to revisit from the last episode that KFC mutant chicken story. Now, this specific claim wasn't in our 5 trails, but it's floated around in the same waters for decades. So let's go ahead and clear that out of the way. The ideal that KFC changed its name because the government forbade them from calling their meat chicken anymore. This is a straight-up hoax. Yeah, sorry to disappoint you folks. Although I'm pretty sure their chicken is pumped full of all kinds of hormones and genetic modification. We have that loophole, so there's no need for them to change their name. The actual conspiracy traces back to a chain email from the late 1990s, complete with a made-up University of New Hampshire study that the university itself has repeatedly and publicly denied ever happened. KFC really did shorten its name in 1991, but for 2 boring, documented business reasons. Kentucky, the state, had trademarked its own name, and was charging a licensing fee to use it. And KFC wanted to de-emphasize the word fried as the culture shifted towards health-conscious eating. So, no mutant chickens, on the record. No Six Flags, no government ban on the word chicken. KFC's own suppliers, Tyson, Pilgrim's Pride, the same companies stocking grocery store shelves, not that that should make you feel any better after what we just discussed, raise ordinary chickens. And the company has even sued and won damages against outlets in China for spreading the fake photos. So a real company, a real supply chain, a fake legend. I hope that one's settled, folks. I had a few questions and inquiries after the last episode because I don't think I made it clear. So with that out of the way, let's get to that non-melting ice cream. This one holds up. The FDA had a formal standard of identity for ice cream since 1939. Real requirements for how much dairy fat and how little air has to be in there for a product to legally earn the name ice cream. A lot of what's sold today doesn't clear that bar, which is exactly why you'll find frozen dairy dessert printed on the box instead. It's not necessarily a conspiracy. That's more like a company legally required to be honest about what category their product falls into once it's been reformulated with more stabilizers, gums, and vegetable oil than ice cream standard allows. The ingredients causing the no-melt effect, polysorbate 80, carboxymethyl cellulose, carrageenan, guar gum, man, that was a tongue twister, are all legal, FDA-recognized additives that have been used in commercial ice cream since as far back as the 1950s. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting, though, and not fully cleared up. There is real, peer-reviewed research, not internet speculation, but published science, looking at whether some of these emulsifiers disrupt the gut microbiome, damage to the intestinal lining, and contribute to inflammation. Now that research is real, and it's ongoing, and it hasn't produced a final verdict yet. So, the honest answer here is the chemistry set framing is accurate. The legal distinction is real and disclosed. And the health question is a genuinely open one worth watching, rather than just outright dismissing. Now let's turn to the one I'm really peeved about. The lab-grown chocolate. Every fact on that trail is true and checks out. And here's the twist. None of it was secret. This is front page trade press news. The company is called Celeste Bio, based in Israel. And yes, Mondelez International, the company behind Oreo, Ritz, and Babbling, is a named strategic investor. They really did unveil the world's first cell-cultured chocolate bars. And yes, their process really does start with a single cocoa bean grown in a bioreactor. But the motive isn't secrecy. It's a real, well-documented cocoa supply crisis. West African production dropped as much as 40% in 2024 due to disease and extreme weather, sending cocoa prices past $12,000 a ton, more than 4 times normal. Every major chocolate maker is scrambling for alternatives because the traditional supply chain is genuinely buckling. that doesn't erase the real risk to smallholder farmers in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire if this technology scales. That's a completely legitimate economic concern, and industry insiders themselves have called it, quote, an insurance policy, unquote, against the very supply chain those farmers depend on. So, real technology, real motive, real risk to real livelihoods, just not a hidden one. It's happening in full public view, in food industry trade journals, with company press releases bragging about it. They're gonna ruin chocolate, folks. Alright, let's talk about those bioengineered labels. And this trail holds up better than almost anything else in this whole piece. Congress really did pass a law in 2016 requiring a national label, and really did choose the unfamiliar term bioengineered over GMO or genetically engineered, terms the public actually recognizes. Companies really are allowed to satisfy the law with a QR code or a text message shortcode instead of plain words on the package. And a major food safety advocacy group really did sue the USDA over exactly this, arguing the standard was designed to minimize how many consumers would actually see the information. As of an October 2025 federal appeals court ruling, part of that lawsuit succeeded. The court found the USDA had improperly excluded many highly processed foods from disclosure requirements altogether, and sent the rule back for revision. So, the criticism wasn't fringe internet paranoia. It was serious enough that a federal circuit court agreed with a chunk of it. Were you familiar with that one? I was. Only because I've been paying attention to this whole GMO bioengineered racket for quite a while, folks. Now let's get into that loophole we was talking about. And folks, I want to slow down for this one, because out of everything we've covered today, this is the part that's true, documented, and currently in the process of being fixed in real time. Since the 1970s, the FDA has allowed a pathway where a company can determine, using its own hired scientists, that a new food ingredient is generally recognized as safe, and simply start using it without ever formally notifying the FDA. No public comment period. No mandatory independent review. The company grades its own homework exactly as described. And this isn't a theory. It's written into federal regulation, and the current Secretary of Health and Human Services has publicly called it a loophole that lets ingredients with unknown safety data into the food supply without notifying the FDA or the public, and has directed the agency to begin the long legal process of closing that loophole. That process is ongoing as of me recording this. This is, without question, the most solid piece of the system isn't watching closely enough evidence in this entire episode. And I will be keeping my eye on the future developments in that area. Then what about that old double standard? Well, it also holds up, but with a nuance. Titanium dioxide is genuinely banned in the EU over DNA damage concerns and genuinely still legal here. BHA and BHT, preservatives that extend shelf life, are restricted or under formal review for cancer and endocrine disruption concerns. Propylbiopen, I'm sure I butchered that, was banned in the EU back in 2006 and is still used here. Now, this isn't because European scientists have access to secret data Americans don't. It's a difference in regulatory philosophy. The EU generally requires companies to prove an ingredient is safe before it goes to market. The US, through that GRAS loophole and similar pathways, generally just allows any ingredients on the market, and only bulls them if evidence of harm accumulates afterwards. In other words, when some civil lawsuits from people who have suffered the consequences of ingesting these chemicals finally start piling up enough that it costs them money, well, then they address the situation. Here's something worth knowing. That gap has been narrowing fast in just the last year and a half, with the FDA banning red dye number 3 in January of 2025 and announcing a broader phase-out of synthetic petroleum-based dyes since. So the double standard is real, but it's not static. It's actively shifting under real political and regulatory pressure right now. But we all know that politics is slow, folks. In the meantime, be careful what you stick in your pie hole. Now here's where I want to be very precise, because this is the part most likely to get flattened into a soundbite. The genetic modification process itself, inserting or editing specific genes in a crop, has been reviewed by the National Academies of Sciences, the World Health Organization, and independent researchers across more than 1,700 published studies. And the consistent finding is that approved GMO crops show no evidence of causing cancer, allergies, or other disease in humans, compared to conventional crops. Well, that's about as broad of a scientific consensus as exists on any food safety question. But considering the broken system, I mean, how much of these studies can actually be trusted? Unresolved scientific controversy does exist with glyphosate, the herbicide often used alongside herbicide-tolerant GMO crops, sold under the brand name Roundup. The World Health Organization's cancer research arm classified it as probably carcinogenic in May of 2015. Most national regulatory agencies, the EPA, the European Food Safety Authority, Health Canada, have reviewed the same data and concluded it doesn't pose a meaningful cancer risk at typical exposure levels. Juries in multiple U.S. lawsuits have sided with plaintiffs and awarded massive damages against the manufacturer. The American Academy of Pediatrics flagged concerns about glyphosate exposure in children as recently as December of 2023. This is a live, legitimate, scientific, and legal dispute, not a settled matter in either direction. And it's worth being honest. They're claiming that GMOs are safe, but at the same time, the specific chemicals commonly used alongside those GMO crops are not. So where does this leave us, folks? One thread, the mutant chicken, turned out to be pure fiction, decades old, thoroughly and repeatedly debunked. Several threads, the ice cream category shifting, the lab-grown chocolate, the deliberately unfamiliar labeling language, the US-Europe gap, turned out to be completely real, openly documented, and in most cases, currently being argued about in courtrooms and Congress as we speak. And then that one thread, that grass loophole, turned out to be the most serious, most under-discussed, most quietly damning piece of the entire puzzle. Real enough that the country's own top health official is right now trying to close it. Here's my case, for what it's worth, and you can take it or leave it. I don't think anybody's cooking up monsters in a secret lab to hurt your kids on purpose. I think what's actually happening is duller and, in its own way, more troubling than that. A food system built on decades of "trust us, we tested it ourselves," where the burden of proof sits backward. The ingredient gets to stay on the shelf until somebody proves it's dangerous, instead of having to prove it's safe before it ever reaches your table. That's not a Frankenstein story. That's a story about who's watching the henhouse, and for how long nobody thought to ask. Grab your Bibles, folks. Open them up. Because Scripture tells us to prove all things and hold fast to what is good. Test it yourselves, folks. Read the label. Ask the questions. Don't take my word for it, and don't take theirs either. And when you're done reading those labels, make sure you go read your Bibles. Alrighty, thanks for joining me here, folks. This here episode was more of a little catch-up of sorts from the last episode. I ask you folks to reach out if you want to do a little deeper dive, and those monuments and the Frankenfood was top on the list. So there you have it. Yes, Rebecca. Aleister Crowley, deep dive. Alright, folks. On behest of one of my neighbors, we're going to be doing a deep dive into Aleister Crowley, the Beast 666. Was he really the Beast spoken of in our Bibles? So make sure you tune in next week. If you'd like to carry on this conversation we've been having this evening, come join us over on the Patreon for the post-rant after show, where this old man's gonna stop babbling and start ranting about one of my own personal and unsettling experiences at the dining table. Otherwise, I hope to see you here next time, and until next time, Abba willing, shalom, shalom.
Salam, our friends. In a world that seems to spin faster every day, where truth feels fragile, and anger fills the spaces where love used to live, remember this: God's light still breaks through the noise. It shines through every honest word, every act of mercy, every moment we choose prayer instead of pride. Nations will argue, kings will fall, but his kingdom, the one written not on paper, but on our hearts, stands forever. So keep your eyes on that light, keep your heart soft even when the world grows cold, and when the night feels long, just whisper, though I sit in darkness, the Lord will be my light. Until next time, keep the faith, keep watching, and keep riding toward the kingdom. Shalom.